barriers to voting this year. First, no match, no vote. What this refers to, and more people know about this than knew about it a few weeks ago because it's been such a big deal all over the country, is the idea that there are now state computerized electronic databases of voters. And people are pushing the states to say that if there's a difference between the name in the voter file and some other voter list, whether it's the driver's licenses or Social Security, then maybe that's voter fraud, and anyway, that person ought not be on the rolls. Now, we've done a number of studies and litigation over the years on this. This first popped up in 2006. There are many reasons why there would be data errors. This is disenfranchisement by typo. There are numerous ways that government lists have typographic and other errors, and this is an actual person, and these are all the ways that there could be errors with this one person's name. Now, as I say, this was a product of the Help America Vote Act. It first was pushed in 2006. At that point, we actually filed a lawsuit against the state of Washington, and a federal court declared that this was actually illegal. It was illegal to block voters from being registered because of these data errors. Now, you heard a lot of the arguments you're hearing now. The state of Washington in federal court said, you know, this is a phantom problem. We don't make mistakes, and when we do, we catch them. We don't make these errors. You know, we're very careful. And the problem for them is that the brief in which they made this argument to the court on the front page misspelled the name of the judge, and that we did win the case, and he struck down the law. And we thought that, in effect, the victory on no match, no vote had been largely won. But in the last few months, the push for no match, no vote all across the country has been quite fierce and would have a significant impact, if successful, on tens or hundreds of thousands of voters across the country. Let me give you some state-by-state examples. In Ohio, there are 660,000 new voters, newly registered since January 1st. Of those, more than 200,000 have data errors, basically where there's a mismatch in some way between their file and some other file. And of course, that is substantially larger than the margin in the last presidential election. Now, as you may know, this has been something that has been litigated. The case recently went to the Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals, which actually ordered the state of Ohio to do no match, no vote. Then it went to the Supreme Court, which overturned what the Court of Appeals had done. It is now back in state court in Ohio, and we now actually have a tremendous example of why these data files are not necessarily voter fraud. This is, of course, the most famous man in America, Joe the Plumber. Joe the Plumber's voter file has a data error. His name is misspelled on his voter registration. He's not a new voter, but if he were a new voter, this policy would purge him from the rolls. So we were delighted to point that out. It is now in state court, and we could be happy to talk about how we see that playing out. We're hopeful that this will be blocked before the election. I should also mention that in the filing to the U.S. Supreme Court, this was a case brought by the Republican Party of Ohio, but the plaintiff was a guy named David Mahal, which is spelled M-A-H-A-L on the top of the page and M-Y-H-A-L on the bottom of the page of the brief that they filed with the Supreme Court. So again, people should not be disenfranchised by typo. Another place, in addition to Ohio, that's gotten less national attention where no match, no vote is significant, is Wisconsin. There, the Attorney General has been trying to force the state election board to implement no match, no vote. Now, the state election board are 6 retired judges, and when those judges checked their own voter registration records, they found that 4 of the 6 had data errors. And you can see what those data errors are. And so that board has been resisting, and I believe that the Attorney General either has threatened or has actually sued the state board, but is pushing very hard. And so far the state board is resisting. In Florida, where this has been litigated and debated for several years, we have found in our litigation that the data errors are much higher, the risk of a mismatch is higher in different groups. Please note that the Latino voters have a much higher percent of the applicant pools rejected than either African Americans or white voters. And you can sort of understand intuitively why that might be the case. For a lot of Anglo registrars, the names are harder to spell. And this does actually, in fact, have a disparate impact. So we're happy to talk about no match, no vote. As you can see in Ohio and other places, this could potentially impact hundreds of thousands of people. So that's no match, no vote. The second big challenge that we see has to do with voter purges. We released a report on this a few weeks ago. We know that millions of voters are purged from the rolls, names kicked off the rolls. We know that 13 million voters were purged from the rolls in just a 2-year period of time recently. We know that for every one voter recently registered to vote, 2 names were removed from the rolls. Now, voter purges are not necessarily by themselves a bad thing. It's a housekeeping matter. You want to make sure that the names are the right names on the rolls. You don't want the dead to be able to vote. You don't want people to not properly be registered. But the problem is the way voter purges are conducted is they are shrouded in secrecy. Voters are not given the opportunity to know that they are being kicked off the rolls. These lists are full of errors, and they open the door to partisan manipulation. So we, along with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, are filing public records requests, such as a FOIA, in several dozen states to try to pry off the lid of secrecy and find out how this is happening before the election and after the election. But these voter purges have all kinds of problems. We don't know what they all are because it's secret, but these are just a few from this year. In Mississippi, an official wrongly and unlawfully purged 10,000 voters a week before the primary from her home computer. We know that in Muskogee, Georgia, there were 700 people purged from the rolls because they supposedly had felony convictions, including people who'd never done anything wrong in their lives, who never had a parking ticket. In Louisiana, 21,000 voters this year were purged because they had supposedly moved out of state, but the way they set it up, and this is in the wake of Katrina, the way they set it up, it was almost impossible for these voters to prove that, in fact, they had never registered somewhere else. In Colorado, where there's a big dispute over whether purges have happened and how many voters have been purged, we know that the Secretary of State admits that there are at least 2,454 illegally purged voters, but in fact there may be more. And when I say illegally purged, let me be very clear. It is unlawful under the National Voter Registration Act for purges to be occurring right now. There's a window before the election where even well-done purges are not supposed to happen, and we're well past that time. The third thing is something that hasn't happened yet so much, which is all these lists, all these problems with lists create the opportunity for partisan voter challenges. And those challenges happen mostly on Election Day, or they may happen during early voting. We know that this is happening in substantial numbers. We know, for example, that in Michigan, one political party is planning to place 4,000 challengers at the polls. We expect to see this kind of thing happening all over. An example, in this election, in Montana, 6,000 voters were challenged. One of the voters who was challenged is this gentleman here. He is a former state legislator named First Lieutenant Kevin Fury. He was challenged because he was going on active duty military service, so he wasn't going to be living in his previous address. And a federal judge struck this down, and there was a huge political outcry at the same time. So the people trying to do that pulled back. But as I say, this is something that is actually going to be happening more and more over the next 2 weeks. So for journalists who are here looking at how this issue is going to play itself out in the future, now the turn moves toward less of the systemic purges and more toward individual challenges, which you're going to see. And in some ways, it's harder because it's harder to remedy if something's happening on Election Day. We also know that there is at least an idea that voters will be challenged because of having had home foreclosures. You all might be familiar in Michigan, a political blog quoted a party official as saying this, that this was the plan. He actually denies it and I believe has sued the blog, so we don't want to say that we know for sure what has actually happened. It is, however, the case, first of all, that this could potentially be a very significant thing because this is the map of where the foreclosures are all over the country, and we've heard of it. We've heard of it in other places as well. There was in Marion County, which is in Indiana, which was coincidentally the name of the county in the voter ID case. The local officials there are saying, well, we might challenge for the same reason. So that is, in effect, another thing to look out for.